Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gelecek Bilimde. And Randy, welcome.
Hey, great to be here.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting our invitation for a live stream. And you're kind of one of my idols in storytelling. And after I was seeing your TED talk, TEDMED talk, it was really interesting. So today, that's why I thought, like, okay, let's bring Randy, and then he can talk more about it. And we would like to learn more because our name is in Turkish. Gelecek Bilimde means future is in science. In Turkish, literally means like that. We're a science communication platform. We have YouTube channel, Twitch channel, social media platforms. We have a website that we publish articles, popular science articles. So we're working on that, and we have doing this. I've been doing this with over 40 volunteers. So we are a volunteer kind of NGO, and some of them are in the backstage now helping me with technical details, and of course our viewers on YouTube. So without further ado, that's just about us. And without further ado, I just want to give you the floor, and then you have a nice presentation for us, I think.
I hope so. Speaking of people being in the backstage, what's that in the backstage over your left shoulder?
So you mean this one? Like
yes, your left shoulder.
Yeah, left shoulder. It says future science, and then the other and but therefore. So I wanted to have like an Easter egg there for you.
There you go, a little plug for upcoming attractions. That's what we're going to be talking about. So wonderful. Thank you very much. Great to be here with all of these people that I can't see, but hopefully they're out there somewhere. And what we're going to talk a little bit about is not so much storytelling, but narrative structure. And the brief background on me is that I once upon a time was a marine biologist, and I achieved tenure as a professor of marine biology. But following the template over your shoulder, I realized I had a bigger, broader interest in the mass communication of not just science, but information in general. Therefore, I resigned from my tenured professorship and headed off to Los Angeles, where I went to film school at the University of Southern California, got out, made films for about, all the way up to the present, 25, 27 years, something like that, 30 years, and then began communicating back to the science world and the world in general what I'd learned from deep inside of Hollywood in terms of broad communication. And the realization I came to is that there is one overriding element that's more important than everything else, and that boiled down to one word is the word narrative. That's what we're going to talk about here. So storytelling is one version of narrative. It has narrative at its core, as I'll explain to you, but we're really interested in everything. So on that note, shall we start sharing these slides and hope that this works for us? And you tell me, is that filling the screen right there?
No, it's not shared yet. You need to share.
Okay, let's try that again. Yeah, we've had this happen before, and so now we're sharing. Now we got to click on that. Now hopefully I'm sharing. Now,
yes, you're sharing.
Now, do we fill the screen?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, we are now ready for action, and here we go. The great leopard seal story. Let's begin with that. A little story that's kind of fun. I'll go through this pretty quickly, which is once upon a time back when I was a marine biologist, I had the good fortune of going to Antarctica for 1 month to conduct some research at the McMurdo Research Station there from the National Science Foundation of the United States, and was there working on starfish and their larvae with a group that had been down there for a year, invited me to come join them. We went scuba diving through the ice almost every day for a month. And then on one of the last days, we were lucky enough to be given crew with a helicopter that took us out to the other side of the island where the ice was broken up. You can actually jump into the open ocean there, and got ready to do our dive to go collect some of these starfish off the bottom. These are my two dive partners. It was a balmy 20 degrees, which seemed warm after being inside with -20 temperatures for the previous week. This is the place that we chose to dive in. You can see the water's nice and calm there, and there was about a 5-foot drop from the ice down to the water. This was our dive gear we were getting into, dry suits with the double scuba tanks, my two dive partners, and then the guy in the distance there suddenly looked down in the water. We were over at the edge, and he said, "Oh my goodness." And I looked down at what he was looking at, and what he was looking at was this. It's called a leopard seal. I had never heard of a leopard seal. I'd only been there for a month. They began to fill me in the background on what leopard seals are and what they do. They feed on penguins, and they have these great big teeth that they chomp onto the penguins with. And scuba divers don't look all that different from a penguin. They just look like oversized penguins in the water there. This is how large the adults get for leopard seals, 800 to 1,000 pounds. The one we were looking at had a head the size of a horse's head. So we stood there debating what to do. The two other guys that were supporting us walked down the coast a little bit. They found a place where the ice came all the way right down to the edge of the water. It's only like 6-inch difference, so we weren't jumping off a cliff. So we took all the gear down there with the idea that they could yank us out of the water if anything went wrong, if the seal should happen to show up and harass us. So the guy with the red beard was a wild man. We forced him to go first. He was sitting on the edge of the ice, and he just put his fins on, swung his legs over, and kept taunting us, saying these creatures are as scared of us as we are of them. As soon as we get in the water, it'll go away. And last thing he said to us was no pain, no gain, as he was adjusting his mask. And right then the head of that leopard seal, again, the size of a horse's head, surfaced between his legs. And he screamed. We all screamed. We all flipped around, scratching at the ice to get away from this monster. We finally regrouped about 10 feet back from the edge of the ice, everybody hyperventilating, trying to make sense out of what had just gone on. I grabbed my camera and took this one shot of, you can see the head of the leopard seal over there. Never tried to bite him, was just sitting there smiling at us, waiting for us to get in the water, just curious as far as we could tell. But we were so terrified, we took off all of our dive gear, and all we did that day was just take photographs of penguins on the ice. So that is the great leopard seal story that you may now be wondering, why in the world did I tell you that tale? Now we're going to get to work and break it down and show you the communication dynamics of what was in that story right there. So are we doing good? Can you see these slides okay?
Yeah, everything goes good. Yeah.
All righty. Keep me posted. Let me know if I jump the track here. So now I'm going to review with you that whole story just in very short form. So what I told you was that we were at the ice edge and we were set to dive, but a leopard seal surfaced. Therefore, we moved down the coast. But as we prepared to dive, it surfaced between Ron's legs. Therefore, we spent the day photographing penguins. Now you start to look at the two elements that make up communication. There is, first off, the content, everything in white. That's the information. That's what you're all experts in for your own specific field. And then there's the form, the structure of how we put that information together. The white stuff, I can't help you with. That is the relatively easy part. It's the form part that's really, really challenging. And if you put the stuff together in the wrong form, it becomes boring or confusing. You put it in exactly the right form, it can be really interesting. And that's what we hope to get. And the form then is made up of these three key words that we choose, but more importantly, the three forces of and, but, and therefore, as I'll talk about in a minute. And these are the three central elements here that we use for communication in general. And, but, therefore, they embody the setup of what we're talking about, the problem that we presented, and then the actions and solution that are taken there. These are the three forces of narrative. And this is the deeper part of it, which is that those are just the words, but these are the most common words that capture these three forces. And but are the two most common words of agreement. Contradiction, therefore, is not the most common, but it's really powerful. So is probably the more common form of it. So agreement, contradiction, and consequence. This is what we work on in the training program that I do, which is to try and help you build the intuition so that you can feel these three forces at work when you communicate. So we go back to this structure then, and you can see that not only is that the structure for telling you a silly story about getting chased out of the water by a leopard seal, but I can tell you the nonfiction narrative of the field of study that I had as a scientist, marine ecology, which is that the scientists began really formally studying marine ecology in the 1900s. And in the beginning, they focused more on physiology. But by the 1960s, there was an interest developed in interspecific interactions, competition, predation, therefore gave rise to a whole new approach called experimental ecology. But by the 1980s, things were getting a little too theoretical. So there was a little bit of a shift back to physical factors. That's a very crude history of that field of science, but every field of science would have its own narrative there, its own story of how it emerged. And then we can use this exact same structure for a Hollywood movie. I could tell you the story of a little girl and her dog named Toto, and she lived on a farm in Kansas with a life that was a little bit boring. But then one day a tornado picked her and her dog and her house up and whipped them off to the land of Oz, where she landed in this colorful place, but knew immediately she wanted to get back home. Therefore, she teamed up with these three characters to go down the yellow brick road, because she was told that if they could go see the Wizard of Oz, he would help her get back home. But when they finally make their way to Oz, he says, I'm not going to help you until you bring me the broom of the Wicked Witch of the West. Therefore, they had to sneak into her castle and steal the broom. And the story goes on and on with just ands and buts and therefores. It's the central elements of structure in telling a story and narrative in general. So in the training that we do,
Randy, before we move on,
yes.
if I may interrupt, and you also like hear my voice and know yes. You're like not talking to a screen, but like a lot of viewers are watching now. And it is so simple, but yet so powerful. Like you showed us like in different types of narratives, it's still there. And it's what makes a good story, Aitana. You can see in a Netflix show, in a good movie, you know, and I was thinking, I am a PC game geek. So in PC games also, like I was playing, for example, Skyrim, you go there, you get a mission and it says, but you have to go fetch something. You know, it's always the same thing. And if you look at scientific papers also, good introduction texts, I mean, the good ones, not the, you know, that you mentioned, like the boring ones, good introductory sections of good articles, you also see this, like makes you wonder, like how did they do the story? What did they find? Makes you wonder and follow this narrative. I just wanted to say, so simple, so powerful.
You're absolutely right. And it was only 10 years ago that I formulated it. So we're slowly propagating it. And one little example of what you just said there is one of my film school classmates is a major editor and director for Netflix. He has had to listen to 10 years of me developing this. And now he's absorbed it so deeply that he called me last week after he'd just given a presentation, and he uses it for everything now. And it gives you the ability to shrink down the whole story dynamics, as you saw with that leopard seal story. And it's the core of how we do it. So yeah, and feel free to jump in with questions, whatever, as we go along here. The course that we teach it through now, if I had to give it the single overarching goal, it is this, which is that there is this problem that everybody faces of preaching to the converted. So it turns out the people that already know you and know your stuff, they're really easy for you to talk to because they already get it. And there's a tendency to want to spend your time with those people because it's so easy to communicate with them. But the fact is, anyone involved in communication generally wants to reach outside that inner circle. And so this is a very simple diagram that we've developed here that conveys this whole dynamic, which is you've got your inner circle. These are the people in your office, in your laboratory, your family, your friends, the people that know you on a daily basis. They know all the work you do. They know why your work is important. They know what it means when you've had a breakthrough. They're fun to talk with. They're the ones you want to go to a bar and hang out with because they understand all this stuff. But the first question is, how big is that circle? People tend to overestimate it and think, oh, everybody's interested in me. Actually, turns out to be pretty small. All the rest of the world is your outer circle. That's the challenging part, is reaching the outer circle. The inner circle, you don't need any of this narrative stuff. They already get it. You can just go and give them information and this and this and this, and they'll put it together in their mind. For everybody else, you need this and, but, therefore structure. You need to give them a context. You need to boil it down into the central focus, the problem that you're working on, and the actions being taken to therefore. So we have these two words, and it's the broader term is story and storytelling. So people tend to kind of lump it all into that. But really, the important word is narrative. And people in the humanities world don't like to boil things down analytically like this. But for the science world, there's a need to make things a little more analytical. And so in my book, Houston, We Have a Narrative, in 2015, I offered up a simple analytical definition for the word narrative, which is the word narrative in my world refers to the series of events that occur in the search for the solution to a problem. So it's all about the problem solution dynamic. There was a book written about a decade ago called Storytelling Animal that was really nice, cute book. But really, the bigger topic that you want is that we are problem solution animals. That's what we do day in and day out. That's what all animals do. They're all faced with problems. How are you going to feed? How are you going to reproduce? And why wouldn't the brain evolve around that central dynamic of here's a problem, here's the solution? So that's your secret to how to communicate effectively, is boil everything down to the problem solution dynamic. Here's another way to look at it, which is imagine these four different automobiles here that are completely different looking. Imagine that each one represents a different discipline. So the first one here is argumentation or rhetoric and debate. Second one is storytelling. This is movies and books and novels and plays and things like that. Third one is comedy, telling jokes. And fourth one up there is the scientific method. The four cars are completely different looking, and the four disciplines from the surface seem completely different. But when you open the hood of the cars and the disciplines, what you find is under the hood, everything's exactly the same. They've all got the same driving motor, which is narrative, the problem solution dynamics. So that's what debates are built around, problem solution dynamics. That's what stories are. The Wizard of Oz was Dorothy got handed this problem, finding her way home. Good jokes are built around some problem and how we address it. And then the scientific method is simply problem solution. So the operative word is narrative. And that then becomes the course. This is, that's some of the intro material from the course that we teach. It's 10 1-hour sessions right now. We just started round 17 a couple of weeks ago. And this is, we formalized the course in April of last year when the pandemic began. We had been doing previously for 5 years a live in-person version of it. But it was once we turned it into on Zoom that it's become much more of an incubator, and we began advancing our knowledge and the model of the ABT framework very rapidly to the point where it's gotten pretty sophisticated now. These are all the different groups that we do it on a monthly basis. It's 10 1-hour sessions, usually Tuesday, Thursdays. Right now, we're in round 17 with fisheries biologists, 30 of them usually in the course. Next month, we'll be running it with National Park Service, Smithsonian, and National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And this is what's at the core of the whole thing then, is the ABT framework, these three fundamental words, and, but, and therefore, which again are just the embodiment of the three forces. And this is how you communicate. And so on that note, that's the slide.
Okay, you developed the so you developed the ABT framework, right? Back in the time.
Yeah. Back in the
day. Can I ask, like, how did it came to you? Because in the TEDMED you talked about the South Park example. Is it something that there, or like you just so? Is it before you start the filmmaking training? When you were a scientist, like how did it came?
Okay. So the first thing, the saddest news for everybody to realize is that we've gotten worse with communication over the centuries. We communicate worse today than 100 years ago. And that really needs to be established and talked about. And the science world doesn't like to do the embarrassing thing of talking about the failures that we have nowadays. But we, honest to God, communicate worse than 10, 15, 20 years ago. We keep getting worse and worse. And if you doubt that, you can look at the studies that have been done on what the IPCC is doing, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They put out reports every 2 to 4 years, and along with them, they put out this thing called the SPM, the Summary for Policymakers. There have been 2 studies of that done, one in 2008, one in 2015, that have both shown that year after year, those things get harder and harder to read. People are getting more and more lost and confused. And then what we've seen here in the United States in the last year and a half is a complete communications disaster around the epidemic, the pandemic. And the biomedical world has done a disastrous job of failing to define the ABT dynamics, the singular narrative, what's the core problem, how you address it, and complete lack of coordination. And, 700,000 people have died in this country now as the science world has fumbled and bumbled. So it's at crisis stage in terms of that. We are now in what Marshall McLuhan called the information maelstrom. We produce so much, the science world's produced so much information that it's turned into a maelstrom of everything swirling around where people just can't make sense out of it. And there's your problem, too much information. The only hope, I argue, for addressing that is through simplicity, not complexity, not more and more complicated ways to analyze this stuff. It's just seek out ways to try and shrink it down, boil it down to something simple. That's what this template of and, but, therefore is. But the important thing to note is that 300 or 400 years ago, they already discovered this. So the great philosophers in the 1700s, Kant and Hegel, they came up with what was called the triad, which is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And it used to be taught in schools. And as we've developed all this information, it's been lost, shoved to the wayside. And so now it's just, the solutions are not only buried, but they're kind of dismissed and ridiculed to some extent. There's an arrogance that comes with all this complexity. And a lot of these people producing the complexity look at something that's relatively simple for amateurs, for idiots, things of that sort. So I'm forced to wade through that discrimination, basically, and trying to promote and propagate something simple. That's the bad news, is at the highest levels, I have to deal with that. The good news is it works. And so that's why we're in the 17th round of the course. And that's why we've got thousands of people now that have done this training. We did story circles for 5 years. Now we've done this for a year and a half. And we're producing a series of books. So what happened was it all condensed down into singular model. And where's the freaking book? There we go. And so last November, I wrote this little book, The Narrative Gym, which is only 75 pages. That's the beauty of it. It's super duper short. And really, you know, I encourage everybody just buy it. It's only like $5 or $6, something like that. Buy a print copy, have it on your desk. And at the core of it, what it is the 3-part model that we developed, the ABT development model there. And the idea is that you figure out your central narrative of the project you're working on. You put it into this one sentence, and but therefore, which is very easy to do as a starting point. But once you've got a draft, then there's a lot to strengthening it, making it really good. And that's what the whole book is about. And it's about strength. And the other key philosophical point we make, sort of figuratively speaking, is that the narrative part of the brain is like a muscle that needs to be conditioned over time. And so I picked this up from the improv actors I've worked with in Hollywood for 25 years. And they like to say that improv is like a muscle. You cannot do a one afternoon workshop. You can't do a one little session like we're doing here and think that, oh, I got it. And this happens a lot. A lot of scientists really think that they're quick at picking things up, and they get the 3 words and but therefore, and they say, oh, I'm all done. Thanks. No, you aren't. You're just getting started. We have 15 people or so that run the course with me, and they come back for round after round. They sit through the same sessions, the lectures and everything like that. And as you listen to it again, you get it deeper and deeper and deeper. Narrative is an endless journey. No one's ever perfect at narrative, not even the greatest screenwriters of Hollywood or the greatest novelists. It's just an ongoing process that is at the core of all humanity and goes back at least 4,000 years. So it's incredibly powerful, but that's kind of the bottom line. What is that? There's the title of one of the other books I did, Narrative is Everything. You know, that's what finally dawned on me. This is a kind of fatter one that's really a lot more information. But that's the core message. Narrative is everything. It's incredibly important.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I must apologize the viewers and to you, because today, the city where I'm living is the Liberation Day. It's tomorrow, so I thought this wouldn't be a problem, but they started celebrating early. So if you hear, while I was talking, if you hear some music or cheering, sorry for that.
Liberation from what?
From, I think, Spanish. Leiden is the first city that liberated from the Spanish, I think, in Netherlands.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Then they formed the kingdom, I think. So that's that day. Tomorrow is that day. Sorry for that. Oh. And you were speaking about, like, we are getting worse in the communication. One of our viewers asked, like, what is the reason? Why are we getting worse in the communication? Is it because of too much data?
Yeah,
yeah,
it's too much information. So Marshall McLuhan was the great media visionary. He died in 1980. He's the guy who coined the term, the medium is the message. And in his last 2 or 3 years, I've just recently kind of stumbled across this, but he coined this term, the information maelstrom. And so he died in 1980 before the information explosion had even happened, but he could see the future. He could see the patterns and extrapolate in the future. And that's what he saw happening, was too much information swirling around. That's where we are now, you know, this idea of misinformation. And I've been tracking this for 20 years. I made 2 movies in 2006, 2008, Flock of Dodos and Sizzle, that were about the attacks on evolution science and then climate science. I saw it happening 15 years ago very clearly and tried to warn the science world, you know, look at what's going on. These people are really serious. And a lot of them are very smart. They're going to eventually undermine your whole profession. Marshall McLuhan was already warning about that. Michael Crichton, who was one of probably the greatest communicator of science ever, also was warning about that in the late 90s. The science world completely ignored him. And so all the warning signals were there, but now we're at that point where last year, you know, we have this idiot in our country named Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York City. And as stupid as he is, he had a quote last year on Meet the Press where he said, the truth is no longer the truth. And that's absolutely the truth. We've gotten to the point where we've got 2 sides of every issue in this country, and one side has their facts and the other side has their facts. And it's just, it's all narrative. Who can ever argue the most aggressively through the internet? It's all turned into narrative in this information maelstrom. And the science world is utterly befuddled by that and cannot understand, why won't people listen to us? Why don't they take our word for it? We've done all this hard work. Well, sorry, that's the way it works. And by the way, science world, you're the people that produced the technology that created this mess. You know, you're the ones that created the internet and social media. And one of the biggest concerns for today, I feel, is that we've lost all these storytellers who used to tell cautionary tales about the science world, going all the way back to Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. And Michael Crichton spent his whole career warning about all this innovation through science. With everything good that comes along, there's a dark side to it. With trains came train wrecks. With cars came car wrecks. With the internet comes trolls. With each of these advances, somebody needs to be talking and thinking about the downside of the dark side of it. And nowadays, the world of science has become so. And by the way, now I'm going to say something rotten to you, which is your slug line there. Science is the future. Science and humanities had better be the future. If it's just science, we're doomed. You know, science doesn't understand humanity. And this is the problem we're into now. Science is spewing out all this stuff. And the next thing to come that we now know is artificial intelligence. And there was an article a couple of years ago by Harari in Atlantic magazine, in which he just said, we can see the future with that. We can predict it. Artificial intelligence is going to select for tyranny. So unless somebody starts telling these cautionary tales the right way and getting some advance warning, it's just going to come along and we're all going to be slaves to artificial intelligence. And I don't know what you do about that, but that's the way that a lot of the stuff is spun along. And it's not impossible to push back on it, but it takes people motivated and speaking out about it. But right now, science has turned into this juggernaut. And you see in the US now, the advocates for science are presenting it in this one-dimensional science is the answer to everything. And it ain't. So
yeah, I see what you mean. I see what you mean there. Like even our name. So our name was like, if, for example, this slogan was, sorry for the music. I have to shout. So like it was for a reaction to the post-truth era. You know, like there are other things that you think this is our future, but the things that work, one of them is science. You know, why not trust in science a bit more? But while saying this, you're right. We don't look at why, why people don't trust in science. You know?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to debate this, but trust in science is not the path to the future, because the science crowd doesn't understand society, doesn't understand politics, doesn't understand social dynamics. And so it's very dangerous to just hand over your trust to these people. And that's what's going on. It's what's happened with the climate movement, is that climate emerged 20 some years ago as a major issue. And the science community flexed its muscles and said, there's so much information involved with this issue, you'd better let us take the lead here. And they botched everything. And they let Al Gore be the lead spokesperson in our country, who was a polarizing figure from the outset. And people are totally lost and confused by the climate movement. The science world simply doesn't understand communication. Scientists don't understand media. That was one of the things Michael Crichton said in the last major speech he gave in 1999 at AAAS meeting, trying for kind of the last time to help out the science world with all the incredible knowledge that he had. Michael Crichton was the guy who wrote Jurassic Park and dominated Hollywood. And he was formerly a biomedical researcher. So he knew the science world really, really well. That's why he was so good at communicating. And in that last big speech to the science world, he just said in there, scientists don't understand media. And I've come to realize that firsthand. Scientists do not understand media. We get into that in the course much more deeply, but it's about this fundamental divide between narrative is at its strongest at the singular. And as a matter of fact, here is a book, a best-selling book, The One Thing. This is where narrative is at its strongest, is when you can boil everything down to the one thing. Science tends to be at its strongest when you've got enormous numbers, big data sets and large sample sizes. That's what scientists are drawn to. And they're skeptical of the one thing. They're skeptical of anecdotes. And that reflects their lack of intuition for communication. They don't understand. Communication is at its most powerful with the anecdote, the one little thing. Take a look at any feature article in the New Yorker or something like that in any given month. They almost always start with the anecdote of the one person, because it's out of the one person we can understand the big picture. So they're completely polar opposite dynamics, the gathering of information for scientific research versus communication using this singular narrative, again, of the one thing. So it's a conundrum. It's a really, really tough challenge. And until the science world begins to admit that they don't understand communication, then nothing's going to happen. And that's the problem. One of the things we talk about in our courses, Alcoholics Anonymous, big program in the US, and one of their fundamental principles is we can't help you until you admit you have a problem. That's one of their rules. People come in and sit down in the group, and they're not allowed to sit there and say, well, I don't have a problem with drinking, then why are you here? And that's what happens a lot. And they finally turn to them and say, we can't help you until you admit I have a problem. And that's the starting point. My name is Randy and I'm an alcoholic. I know I have a problem. That's what we need in our group is in our trainings for people to come in and say, my name is Randy. And I know I'm not very good with narrative. I'm ready to work on it. But I run into countless scientists who they've been incubated in their home university where all the students tell them, oh my God, you're so charismatic, you're amazing. And they give each other awards and they give Communicator of the Year awards, and they're all terrible communicators. And they should really ban all communication awards in the science world. The only awards they should allow is communications courage. And there's a whole bunch of climate scientists that really deserve those awards. They've gone out there and they've fought the battles and debated the anti-scientists, and they really deserve awards for their courage, but not for their communication skills, because they're not good. And what happens is they get given these big awards, then they give their big speech at the meeting. And I get emails from people that are at the speech saying, why'd they give this person Communicator of the Year award? They just gave a boring, confusing, stupid speech. So that's there are all these conundrums like that.
Yeah, so I won't go into the debate with you because I don't think I can win. But the other thing is, like, there was this question in the chat where you mentioned the artificial intelligence. So I, prioritize the questions from the chat rather than my own. This question, first of all, the Halil asked, like, first of all, would storytelling be important for all the scientists if they don't have to tell their story, their research source? But I think, like, every scientist, more or less, aren't they writing an article at least? Aren't they writers? Yeah. So why, No,
absolutely.
That should be important for all of them.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've dealt with from the very beginning. I started talking about communication, and I would go give talks at universities, and some of the people would just say, well, I'm not involved with communication. And then you have to explain to them. And for example, when my first book came out, Don't Be Such a Scientist, in 2009, I got invited by a lot of, it was interesting, a lot of huge research institutes, namely Centers for Disease Control and NASA and National Institute of Health. I got invited to come speak, never by scientists, always by their communications people. And all those big research institutes have got these two groups, and they're like oil and water. And it's really painful when you start to talk to them and hear the dynamics, because the communications people are from the humanities world. They don't have the background in science. They shouldn't have the background in science, because that bogs them down. They get too caught up in the content. And as I talked about earlier, all that white material, that you want them to bring in those but therefore elements to help the people that have got all the white material communicate it better. So one of the first invitations I got was from a group at the Centers for Disease Control, where they have 10,000 employees. They had 500 communications people there. And I did a conference call before I went there for a whole first day. That was really, I ended up doing like 5 or 6 visits there, workshops. And they set me up the first day there, and they'd warned me in this conference call the week before. They said, the scientists just don't listen to us. We try and work with them on communicating their stuff. They hate having us come into their office and their labs. We are this imposition, get out of my office. We're trying to do this important research that's going to save humanity. And then the communicators have to say, that's nice, but if we don't communicate it out there. And I ended up, the first day I was there, they set me up 3 sessions that day with like 30 to 50 scientists in a room each time, in which they said to me that you got a Harvard Ph.D., you got tenure as a scientist. Maybe they'll listen to you, because they won't listen to anything we have to say about them. And it ended up in these shouting matches at times with some of them saying, these people waste our time. And I was saying to them, all your work is going to amount to nothing if you don't team up with the communications people. And now here it is 11 years later, and everything I said to them is absolutely the truth. This past year, we've now got a country where people are eating this horse ivermectin stuff. We had a president telling people to inject themselves with bleach. We had all this nonsense. And the lead spokesperson for the biomedical community, Anthony Fauci, let himself be co-opted by that president, end up on the stage, basically by visual presence there, endorsing all the craziness that went on. It just was a communications nightmare that still hasn't been identified as a core problem. They still, the problem is we got to come up with better vaccines. Yeah, but if you don't communicate it, it ain't going to work. So it goes on and on.
Yeah, like we see it everywhere, like not just US, in Netherlands, in Turkey, we saw like the communicating, even if you like it's just the story you had. Like, we had the vaccine, but there are still anti-vaxxers on coronas. Like, the scientists did the job, like they did a wonderful job. They found it, and it's really good. But like, you can't just convince people that we are not injecting nanorobots, but just the mRNA. That's the story. So
and those people do listen to voices that they like. So if you can find the right spokespeople and eventually get them to advocate the right thing, those people will listen to those voices. They follow leaders. It's just that the leaders they follow are the ones that are telling them, nano robots.
Couple of years back, I think like people watching will remember, in Turkey there was like, the time the bird flu, like with the chickens and other, in that time the chicken industry was like at its knees. It was going to collapse in Turkey because like we were killing chickens even in a mass way. And then I think very clever person, I don't know, in health ministry or FDA's analog in Turkey, they found one journalist, Uğur Dündar, and he was this like long tenure in this journalism, and he was the guy went in a restaurant and finding their kitchens dirt, those kinds of things. He was doing that kind of show. Then they put them on a advert, on a commercial. Then he is like walking around the chicken industry and telling it is safe, you can eat. These are like without bird flu, and it went back to normal right away. So he had a huge impact.
What a great case study. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. That's what, and that's totally irrational. But communication is irrational, and you have to understand that. And that's the hard part for the science world. That was the hard part for me, was that I left my science career where everything was rational, moved to Hollywood, and my first book opens with the first night in the acting course where the acting teacher screamed her lungs out at me and saying, you think too much, you're caught up in your head. Acting is not thinking, it's acting, it's down in the gut. And it's irrational by design. And, getting that, I've spent 15 to 20 to 25 years processing and understanding that. There's your fundamental challenge. You're not going to rationalize your way out of this stuff. And that sadly is what the science world continues to do in the US, is the more this becomes a problem, the more they bring in more PhDs, let's bring in more teams of PhDs, and they're just digging themselves deeper and deeper into this hole. It's not going to get fixed that way.
Yeah. Especially today with every kind of specialization, sub-specializations, because the information, the data is so huge. And maybe artificial intelligence, like Halil asked, like, would that help? Would that change anything with the communicating part? What do you think?
Would artificial intelligence change the state? What does he think? You got to understand, this gets so deep. There's a guy named James Borat, who is one of the experts on talking about artificial intelligence. And he did a podcast a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. That's the most brilliant thing I've heard to date. I should have gotten you the link, but James Borat, B-R-A-T. I think if you just type that in podcast. And what he talked about in there, the problem is that our brains are programmed with this story stuff, with this and but therefore stuff. And it's not rational thinking. It's story thinking. It's narrative thinking. It's evolved for thousands of years. This is not something that's happened in the last couple of decades. It's programmed deeply in there. And there are characteristics of the types of stories that we want to listen to. And Robert McKee, who's the great screenwriting guru of Hollywood, has really refined a lot of the stuff and talked about, when you look at the stories that last over the ages, mythology, the myths that persist, when you look at things like Star Wars, stories that resonate around the globe, both in space and time, they persist and everybody connects with them. There are shape characteristics of those stories called classical design. And for example, one of the shape characteristics is the closed ending. People go to movies, the masses want to see in a movie, there's things that they want to see. They want the movie to have a happy ending. They want it to all come together, answer all the questions. That's called a closed ending. You can make a movie that doesn't have that with an open ending, but your audience will get really small. And
I hate those. I hate open-ended movies.
You're the problem. You're the one that's bad attention to type of people. There you go. I mean, it's so fascinating. Robert McKee's book Story lays it all out in there. And that's there's 8 characteristics he goes through. I've picked 5 and presented them twice in my books. But what we could learn from those characteristics is so powerful, important. That's one of them. But the thing that James Borat talked about in that podcast interview was he said all the movies he's seen so far in artificial intelligence, they don't get it right. They're not cautionary tales because, like Terminator and all the other ones, they have the happy ending. The humans eventually rise up and put the robots back in their place, and we get control of humanity again. And you have to do that if you want the masses to come into your movie, because they don't want to go home with the thought of disaster. But there's one movie, and he says it in his interview. He says, the only movie I've seen to date that looks like what I see for the future is Ex Machina. Do you know that movie? That one, how does it end? You know, it ends with the bot busting out of the facility and going out into society, and just, there's your final moment. Like, here come the bots. And it doesn't end with humanity getting everything under control. And guess what? It wasn't a blockbuster. You know, it's an artsy little film that people loved, and it's really good. It took me 2 viewings of it to really totally get what was going on there. But that, he hit the nail on the head there. That's the conundrum, is that the kinds of movies that everybody wants to see are the ones where we win in the end, and they end up not being all that cautionary. So I don't know how you deal with that, but that's his fear. I mean, there was a lot of things written the last few years of people deeply worried about where artificial intelligence is going to lead us. And we don't know. It could be good, could be bad, could be our friend that does great things for us, or could deactivate the human race, you know, guide us into this kind of land of the lotus eaters, where we get to have a couple more generations where everybody is happy and fun. And then as we do that, we get neutered and there's no more reproduction of humans. And then we're left with a planet full of robots. I don't know. It goes on and on.
I mean, now I understand a little bit better, like what you meant by, you know, just science and not humans. If the future is just science, is not, and humans there. Now I understand better, because after you know, after Frankenstein, those stories, cautionary stories, after that something happened around some time, and we were like, science, go full, no restriction, like science is good, we are advancing.
Tell me more about that. What happened? Yes,
do everything, and then like we would full throttle on science, and there's no cautionary stories anymore, there's no caution with it. I think that's when the breaks loose. You know what I mean? Like, then I think I understand.
You know the word scientism?
Yeah.
So everyone should be aware of that word scientism. I didn't know about it until about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. My buddy, Andy Revkin, who was the climate reporter for the New York Times for 25 years, he's the one that first told me about scientism. And that word means what you're talking about there. It's this deep-seated belief that science can solve every problem that we face as humans. Yeah, good, on scientism. And it's very, very deep, you know, and maybe someday science will solve everything, but that's going to be a long ways down the road. And before then, we still need the humanities. And that's why what's really fun with my course here is that we have 15 or so people working that do it with me. And in there, we have 5 main lectures. One of them is from a very prominent historian, Patty Limerick, who is a MacArthur Fellow. One of them is from a business guy, Park Howell, who's the host of the Business of Story podcast. One's from an improv instructor, Brian Palermo, who doesn't know the first damn thing about the science world. And so it's these people from other disciplines bringing in, now working with a lawyer. And what we're doing now that's going to be very, very cool is we're turning this into a whole set of books, each for just slightly tweaking the book into individual disciplines. So we've just finished the one for business. I got a copy of Park Howell is my co-author in the business.
And maybe for levels, like how much they want to go in deeper onto, communication.
No. What we realized was that this first one, if you don't put the name of the discipline in there, most people in the discipline aren't going to buy it. They're like, oh, that must be for other people. And Park Howell came to me and said, you know, what if we just slap the word business on the cover of it? And oh my God, you're right. So that's what we've done is.
Then the white coats get it, you know.
That's right. So now the people in the business world look at this. Oh God, I guess that's for me. Now a guy named Doug Passon and I are working on the same thing for law, because he works with lawyers and using storytelling for lawyers. And he's been using the ABT for the last 3 or 4 years and absolutely flipped over it. He came to us and he said, is there any chance we could co-author a book? And right when Park and I had done this one, we said, yes, let's make that the next one for law. And then the next one after that is going to be for history, because Patty Limerick is now propagating the ABT framework with all these historians. And it's just going to go on like that. And then after that, we've got the environment, and then we've got for politics. And there, by the end of the year, there should be a set of 5 of these books that are just, the core of the book is the same ABT model. It's just got the 7th chapter for each one is 5 applications of the ABT within that discipline. So Park took the 7th chapter and talked about, here's 5 different ways in the business world for sales, for marketing, for branding, for, you know, I don't know what else. And then the law guy is going to do that, you know, for, this is for making your argument in court. This is for sentencing videos. This is for applications of the ABT in that specific realm. So that's the breadth of it all. We're getting there. It's slow, and the academics tend to just, they don't like, as I said, the simplicity of it.
There's resistance. Yeah. Just resistance to admitting. So like, I'm a PhD student now. I'm doing my PhD on epidemiology, and in the department with one of my colleagues and friend, like Lisanne, we did Lisanne Dommerheisen with her, and we together like formed the science communication committee just within the department, because we could just get the permission for that. And then one of the first workshops, like one guy from the communication department of the hospital that I'm working on, he came and then told about your ABT method. You know, that then I found you and watched the TEDMED video, and then invited you to learn more. And then now we started doing workshops. Now the next workshop, for example, I will teach on how to create short animations. You know, I attended a conference on headache conference last month, and usually they ask you, now the Corona times, they ask you to prepare like a 8-minute PowerPoint presentation. You just basically record your screen. Instead of that, I, you know, did my abstract of my article. I did it in a video abstract with the animation, you know, just to make a change. And then I get some emails, you know, like, oh, it was interesting. We remember it more. So this change slowly comes.
Wait a second. Let me cut you off now.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me in one sentence, one ABT sentence, what that abstract was about. There you go.
Well, no.
It's over your shoulder. You forget the words. Okay.
Fortunately, we did it before. I did this as a exercise for the workshop, so I should have done this. Okay, boy. Migraine is a really prevalent and a disabling disorder, but we don't know its consequences really well. Therefore, we studied if migraine leads to stroke in elderly, and we found the answer is no. So I added an and after the therefore, sorry.
Yeah. No. That was interesting. Okay. So once again, migraine is really big problem, but we don't know what.
We don't know the consequences of it, the side effects, consequences of it.
Okay. Of which stroke is a likely.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And therefore did the study.
Therefore did the study.
Yeah. Interesting. So see, that would be your starting point, your ABT that you'd write up for the course. And then what we do is this exercise called the ABT build, in which it's about usually 5 to 7 minutes, where I have on the screen what you just told me. You have it written up as an ABT. Then we set to work and getting deeper into it and rearranging it and setting up the context better and all sorts of things like that. It would take me a little time to work on that one. But that's the basic exercise, is trying to get these things. And it's trying to make it as powerful as possible. And for example, one of the things that we know, the dynamic you want to tap into, and this starts to get into the deeper depths of it all. But what we know from the monomyth structure that Joseph Campbell resolved is that you want
hero's journey, right?
Hero's journey, exactly. But it's more the narrative structure, which is you want that first phase before we get to the problem. You want that to be idyllic. You want it to be perfect. You want it to be, we know this and this and this, and we know, and if we can figure out all the consequences of what having a migraine is, then we can work with people and make sure that no one ever suffers any pain at all from migraines. But what we don't have right now is this. And so you paint a perfect world, and then in a single moment with the word but, you pull the rug out from under it. That's when you grab people's attention, is when you get them to buy into this perfect world. Oh yeah, that's the world I want. That's great. Are we there? And then you say, but no, we're not even close to that. Therefore, this is what needs to be done. But it's working. And that's how you strengthen the ABT, and you make it into a powerful narrative that grabs people and pulls them in. And there's a lot to that, you know, and the way in which you sort the words out and you get that ordinary world to be as happy and pristine and joyful as possible before you turn it. And then you hit people hard right there. And then there's a way to compact it down there so that you maximize contrast going from super wonderful to disastrous. And that's the moment where people go, wow, this is important. But that's what we do with the ABT framework course. And it is incredibly powerful, and it's broad and applies everywhere. It's just that it takes some, you know, starting point of conceding that you don't know this stuff. And science world kind of isn't at that stage at all yet. And, you know, jumping back to the societal problems, I think one of the sad things, as I said, was that 15 to 20 years ago, you could see this anti-science movement developing. And had the science world been broad-minded enough and forward-looking, they should have begun putting together a contingency plan in the United States together back then in 2005, saying, what are we going to do if this country ever elects an anti-science president?
Yeah.
15 years ago, there was reason to start getting ready for that. And it happened. We elected an anti-science president, basically, and everybody was dumbfounded. Oh, my God, how could this happen? It was developing 20 years ago. You had all the advanced signals, but science world doesn't want to think that way. And so they keep getting blindsided, and it's not done. You know, yeah, the guy lost in the last election, but we know they're getting very powerful. It's going to keep going. There needs to be a contingency plan for these sorts of things, but that sort of thinking doesn't happen.
All of the world. Yeah. So what I was telling in the department, and then the change is coming, and then our like PIs and supervisors, you know, faculty members are all up for it, are really interested in it, and they accept. For our department is they accept, like, they don't know about the communication. But this brings me one of the questions, like Lisanne weren't here today, but she asked this question. In one of the interviews you mentioned like there's no science communication, there's just communication. Can you elaborate on that? I'm really interested in
well, that gets back to everything we've talked about here, you know, which is and, but, therefore, those aren't science words, you know, and, but, therefore, those. And,
so you can apply to every discipline, including science.
That's why we're doing this series of books. I think that the series of 5 or 6 books, when that's all finally put together, is going to be visually making my point more than anything else. The narrative gym applies for all of these different disciplines. You know, by the way, we changed the artwork for the business one. The new cover that was just finished, it's on the web page and on the Amazon page. It's all bright red now. And so it's going to be a rainbow of all these different books for the different disciplines. And it will visually make the point that this tripartite structure is ubiquitous. And, you know, if you're a molecular biologist, I think this is kind of a good parallel to it. There are these genes, the HOX genes, HOX, you know, that are kind of the body form genes that are, I think, very conserved. And they're present in all these different metazoa. And you see them there. It's just that they're massively differentiated with each different species and things like that. But back at the core, there's this singular body plan. Once upon a time, you know, I was an invertebrate zoologist, and that's what you look at, is how this body plan started off very simple and then radiates into all these different forms. You get all this massive complexity, which doesn't make any sense at all until you start to understand, like, these HOX genes. Oh, wow, look at the core of it all. It's got this simple thing. It's the same thing with the ABT, with these 3 forms of agreement, contradiction, and consequence. It radiates out into all this complexity, and that starts to grade into the fractal structure of story. And there's a book written by John York in 2014, a producer with the BBC, who's the only person to date that I can see has made a mention of this, but he talks about the fractal nature of storytelling, which is that storytelling is made up at all these different levels of this tripartite structure, which is, he refers to beginning, middle, and end, because he didn't know about ABT, but ABT is that unit structure. And then again, you flash back 300, 400 years ago, they already spotted that 3-part structure, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It was all there. It's just gotten obfuscated and glommed up by a million things. By the way, going back to epidemiology, do you know who Dr. Michael Osterholm is at University of Minnesota?
No. Unfortunately not.
Must know him. He's really prominent in the U.S. He's on TV, you know, every week practically. He's the director of the University of Minnesota Center for Disease Research. CIDRAP is their acronym. And about a year ago right now, last October, he was on national show Meet the Press, and he said, we've got a problem here with this pandemic in how we're communicating. We're not speaking with a singular voice. We've got contradiction, different experts, you know, all over the place, and we're not drawing on the power of story and storytelling. As soon as I heard him say that on national TV, I got in touch with him through my contacts at CDC, and he and I set to work. And for a year now, I've been trying to coach him on communications. He's a wonderful guy. He's the only prominent epidemiologist in the United States, or anywhere really, who has said, you know, we got two problems. Number one is the science thing. We got to develop these vaccines. But number two is the communication. And we ought to be working equally hard on these two fronts. There's been all this innovation in how to come up with these vaccines, you know, just hyper innovation, hyper research on making that stuff happen faster than ever before. But there's been nothing for communication. There's been no innovation at all. And it's just been the same people doing the same old thing. And then lo and behold, they get their vaccine and they can't get a third of the country to take it. So that's been the great failing. But yeah, Michael Osterholm, Osterholm, look into him, because I am eventually going to try and write something with him, because he gets this stuff and he's really good. And he understands communication. Yeah, he's become my partner in the whole deal. Yeah,
maybe narrative gym for epidemiology. You know, like a new.
Don't tell him yet that, but I will be eventually pitching that to him. Exactly.
You know, my background is in clinical psychology, by the way. Then I switched to epidemiology now, doing my PhD. So if you ever one day like want to write for psychology, you know, just let me know.
You know, I mean, between you and me, well, a lot of people hate me for this, but psychologists are the enemy of communication. The psychologists are the ones that take everything and complicate it all. And they make it so hard for the general public to understand things. And that's what's going on right now. What's happened in the science communication world in the United States is the National Academy of Sciences has developed this huge program that is buying deeply into the psychological work done on communication. And so they buy into terminology like, you know, cognition and perception and values and framing and all this complicated analytical stuff where they just keep slicing things thinner and thinner, and they come up with multiple terms for framing and multiple terms for cognition, all this terminology and jargon, all of which is the antithesis of effective communication. Effective communication needs to just find the simple things.
Singular,
yes.
Yeah.
And when people start buying into all that complexity, that's the death of communication. And, you know, the last thing to mention on that, you hear me mentioning Michael Crichton's name over and over again. The reason is that he wrote a short paper in 1975 that was really the landmark paper, and it was in the New England Journal of Medicine, 1975, back when his story was he went to Harvard Medical School, he did his residency as a doctor at Mass General, and then he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Salk Institute in La Jolla. But along the way, he began publishing these science thriller novels, you know, techno-thriller novels, and was very successful. He was just a gifted writer. He knew how to write this big action type stuff. And by the late 60s, he had published The Andromeda Strain, that became a bestseller and became a big Hollywood movie. So he finally left his biomedical career. But the last publication he did before he left biomedical world was this little note in 1975. And the title of it is Medical Obfuscation, Structure and Function. And it's all 3 pages, New England Journal of Medicine. And what he did was he took one issue of the journal, pulled out 3 papers, put together a list of the top 10 most common characteristics that makes the writing in there obfuscated, meaning taking things that you could have understood, but explaining them in such a convoluted way that you obfuscated. It's all just lost. And in the discussion of that, that's where I draw this thing in his discussion, is where he says, it wasn't always like this. 100 years ago, communication was so much clearer. The starry message from Galileo is an exercise in clear and vivid exposition. That's what he says in that paragraph. That's the problem. You know, we've lost track of communication, and nobody has had a loud enough voice to point this out. And everybody just keeps thinking more is better. Oh, wow, look at social media now. Look at all the things we can do and reach people. And then you look at the IPCC reports. There's your reference point. Just 2 weeks ago on my podcast, I had on John Sterman, who is from MIT, and he did this great short paper in Science in 2008, where he took the previous year's summary for policymakers from the IPCC report, gave it to 200 graduate students in math and science, and had them digest it and then regurgitate it in 2 or 3 sentences of what did this thing say. And 84% of them got it wrong. So if graduate students in math and science at MIT can't make any sense out of what this thing is saying, how in the world are policymakers going to make any sense out of it? So he had that great note there. But again, the problem is when people are good with communication, they boil their whole message down to something short that's only 2 or 3 pages. And then the science world looks at it and thinks if this was important, it would be an 800-page book, but it's only a note. And that's the mind of the scientist. Again, this numbers thing. So literal minded. If this is important, why isn't there an 800-page tome about the need for concision? There's the conundrum with Michael Crichton. He wrote that great paper, but it's only 3 pages. It's a note on medical obfuscation, never got taken seriously. Literally, had he written an 800-page unreadable book about the need for concision back then, it would have been reviewed, talked about everywhere, and it would still be on people's bookshelves today. So what do you do when those are the conundrums? I don't know the answers. I just know the direction we're headed.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to show you one thing, like when you were talking about the, obfuscation, you said like making it, difficult, is if I can find, and this one. So the Raymond.
We're going to wrap things up shortly because I got another podcast thing I got to do in a bit, but yeah. Okay.
So Raymond Cattell was like the psychometry as like a really famous psychologist. He said like, but psychology is a more tricky field in which even outstanding authorities have been known to run in circle, describing things which everyone knows in a language which no one understands. I think this quote,
that's it.
This
right
is really
there.
what you're saying.
It's cuckoo. It's utterly bonkers. And you overlay on that the plague of false positives that's been increasingly well documented in the last 15 years or so. And you look at websites like Retraction Watch, and you see the noise, again, the information maelstrom. You look at the work of Dr. John Ioannidis from Stanford, who is the guy
why most of the published findings are false. That paper.
Yes,
I read
exactly,
that.
Exactly. The bulk of it is false positives. I mean, there's your information maelstrom. It's well documented, and yet it doesn't seem to be a crisis for the science world. You don't see the scientists sounding any alarms over that. They're just cranking out more and more of this stuff. Exactly. All the psychology literature and all of these syndromes that get described, and then somebody else comes along and goes, I mean, the decline effect, if you know about that, that's the tendency for these studies to show an effect that's this big. And then the next study comes along and repeats the work and says, the effect is there, but it's not that big. It's only this. Yeah, there you go. Why most published research findings are false. Ioannidis, that's him. And the wonderful book, and actually the article in The Atlantic in 2009 by David, oh God, why am I forgetting his name? But Lies, Damn Lies in Medical Science. Can you find that right now for your audience? Just type that in. Lies, Damn Lies in Medical Science by Atlantic. Add that to it. And David.
Yeah, the Atlantic. Yeah, I found it. Yeah.
What's
that's like a blog, I think. The writer, you mean David Friedman?
Yes, David Friedman.
David Friedman. Yeah.
He's one of my heroes. He is awesome. I'm glad you reminded me of this. I got to have him on my podcast. I worship that guy. that article that he wrote in there is still used in medical schools a lot. Lies, Damn. There it is. That is a masterpiece. David H. Friedman. There's the person, the type of person that should lead the science world. That kind of critical mind that he just did a great job of telling about the findings of Ioannidis. And it's still there. It's still going on. It's just everywhere. Proliferation. All these crap journals. I can't believe it. Since I left the world of science in 94, I talked to my friends now. And it's just, the information maelstrom. All these phony journals from all around the world, from all these developing nations, where they contact you. I made the mistake of about 5 years ago doing a favor for a friend and publishing this one little essay in the Journal of Science Communication, I think it's called. And I just get inundated by all these requests from these supposed editors from supposed journals. We read your paper. It's so brilliant. We want you to publish in our journal. And by the way, you have to pay us $5,000 to publish your paper.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, I just want to end the stream with one, singular good message, or like not good, but like take home message. What would it be? Because we painted also like we admitted the problem. I'm not trying to, make it so positive or something, but now it seems, there's nothing to do. you know, are there's like an action item, call to action? What can we do? You know, as scientists, admit that we don't know communication and learn about communication.
Okay,
what would you say as a singular message?
All right, this is going to sound terrible, but I have two main things to say. Number one, you have to have a sense of humor if you want to not go insane. You have to have a little bit, you know, you got to read books by Kurt Vonnegut, who lived through the bombing of Dresden and, you know, had his whole bleak vision of the world and always had this deadpan sense of humor. You got to maintain a sense of humor about this stuff because it's not going to change in our lifetime. And then secondly, you've got to be spiritual. You have to believe in what you're doing at a spiritual level, that you're doing it for your mother or father or your friends or something like that, or your children or who knows what. I mean, you get that from a lot of the climate people. We're doing it for our grandchildren. That's the spiritual side of it. You've got to have that going on because the rational side isn't going to work. You know, you're not going to fix the whole system in the next year or two, but you can definitely make some contributions, and it's worth doing that. And that's the thing that I live, breathe by, is the stuff I'm doing. I know the narrative gym is not going to change the big problems. So I've got a deep spiritual side to this stuff that I just really enjoy doing it for, you know, my own kind of belief in why I think this stuff is interesting and important. You just can't be rational about why I'm doing this, because if you do, you'll finally do the math and realize, oh my God, there's no way I could change the whole world. It's not going to work. Yeah. So that's the crazy thing, is a lot of stuff is reverting back to the dark ages. That needs to be the motivation. The science world will never tell its students, you all have to be spiritual, but you better be, because if you think that you're going to do it and get rewards for it, you're going to run into this information maelstrom and all the chaos. And I'm so glad you dug up those couple papers there, because those totally characterize the information maelstrom. That's where we are. And the leadership of the science world doesn't want to admit any flaws. When I made my movies, Flock of Dodos and Sizzle, both of those were good-natured fun, poking some fun at the science world at how bad they are with communication. And a lot of scientists end up hating me over that. And I had screenings that were canceled. I had to endure insults in post-screening panel discussions. We had a big screening that was set up at the Smithsonian Institution, and the scientists there, some of whom knew me from graduate school, bonded together and described the film to the leadership there as painting an unflattering portrait of scientists, and therefore should not be shared with the public. As if we should only present this flattering portrait of science and scientists. What good is that? I mean, that tracks back to the scientism thing you're talking about. Now, this movement has evolved into that, which is it's one-dimensional. We only want to, science is so important, and it's our only hope for the future. Therefore, we've got to present this heroic, it's just craziness.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned spirituality, like in Gelecek Bilimde, I think. So we both know we can't change it in our lifetime, but still, that doesn't mean we don't do anything. We are not going to do anything. Right. So in your role, you're doing wonderful things with the narrative gym and ABT method, and then your courses, books, and then other stuff. And in Gelecek Bilimde, I think we're trying to, we call it the gap, try to fill the gap between, people like you and our audience, just, live streaming science, bringing this to, to the Twitch, like a gaming website, to YouTube. We're trying to do that. And when finishing, I want to show the website. That is this the correct one? That maybe they can find your courses, books. Where can they find it?
We've been so hard at work on this course that we really need to fix our website type stuff. I don't think we've got a great presentation at the moment. That certainly is, Story Circles training. And then scienceneedstory.com is that's where my blog is, but then I'm not doing much on the blog lately. Actually, here's the best thing of all is the podcast, ABT Time podcast, and you get that on Apple. So if you just search that ABT Time podcast, Apple, that'll get you the website on Apple for the podcast. And that's the best thing of all now is that it's really fun, and it's just me, exercise and self-indulgence, all my favorite people, which I'm so glad you reminded me. David H. Friedman, I'm going to track him down somehow, some way, and have him on as a guest. Tomorrow morning, I'm having Mark Dowie on as my guest, and he's awesome. And we posted there, so you don't have to see the live version. But he's a famous environmental journalist who's in his 80s now. He's one of the co-founders of Mother Jones, the magazine, and a great investigative journalist. And, just these are my heroes. This is a chance to, there you go. Look at what we did this past week.
I didn't know. By the way, Randy, I didn't know like you're such a good communicator, but when, for example, when I was searching you for like, looking for questions, just to get I just found a Wikipedia article really short. And then, I couldn't find your books, or like this podcast or website. You need to do something, I think, about that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a pity. Like with all of the things that you do, I think that needs a bit more unifying place that they find you.
Yeah, I agree with you. The problem is that I'm having too much fun and it's all working, and it's booming along. We've got a backlog of people waiting for our course all the way into the spring. It's booked all the way to February or March. So it's not like we feel the need to get out there and promote that sort of stuff. It just takes so much energy. Social media is such a time sink, so we just don't do that. But yeah, look at these last couple episodes. I had these two actor buddies of mine on who were wonderful. We had so much fun this last week. And then the previous week was John Sturman from MIT with his climate stuff that's so important, and great guy, another longtime buddy of mine. And going back to my message, I've never done this before, but my message about spirituality, here, look at what sits here above my desk. That is a painting that my brother did of my mother, who lived to 94 and exited about 5 years ago. And look at the yin and the yang up there. That was her whole belief and philosophy. And she loved her glasses of wine, and she loved to play solitaire. And that's my inspiration, all this sort of stuff. She had the craziest sense of humor. She's in my movie Flockadoodle. She's the star of Flockadoodle. She's so damn funny. And so I do all this stuff for her, more than anybody else, and friends and things of that sort. And that's what you got to have. You got to have the spiritual side of what you're doing, because it
to motivate you, right? Like to keep you going.
Keep you going, because the rational thing isn't going to add up. You're eventually going to hit a day where you do the math like, oh my God, it's not going to work. And then why did I do all this sort of stuff? You have to do it for the spiritual, I think.
I think for us, our volunteers, and like for the people, like our volunteers and viewers, like we receive such a nice comments. Like one of them, the other co-founder received, and I will finish with that one because I know you need to go. Like the one guy like who migrated to US from Turkey, and then he didn't get any education, and he's working like a construction worker, and he was listening podcasts, listening YouTube videos, and he sent this sentimental message to us like, then I always wanted to be a scientist, but now I can't be. There's too late, but I'm still listening your podcast and listening the videos. It still gives me so much joy and gives me hope. So these kinds of things, I think that the things that keep us going in science communication, or communication, as you say, like these kinds of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And these conversations, this has been great having this conversation with you. You told me we only had 15 minutes. What's up with that? I had thought, God, I'm going to have to fit everything in 15 minutes. We're not going to get into anything. Yeah, what a deceptive move. But no, this is great. What are we up to? An hour and 12 minutes. And
I hope you liked it. And even though it's long.
Yeah, no, this is really where it gets to be fun, is when you can get a chance to dive into these things, and especially having you search those things and bring them up. I'll trade some emails with you, because there's a group in Switzerland that are working on, they're in plastics packaging issue, environmental issue, and they're working on possibly doing a run of our ABT framework course. Maybe there's a way they could partner with some of your folks or something like that, and we could do a run, get you guys in there. If you can find the funding, I'll tell you the details on it, but it's such a good course. And so I'm probably going to run a damn section of the course for them where I get up at 6 in the morning or something to make it a reasonable time. Yeah, exactly. And so if something like that happened, it might be possible for a few years that you guys to jump into it as well. Maybe you could partner with them. We tend to, with the course, there's usually 30 people, and we like to split it with 2 groups. So we do like, the National Park Service and the Federal Aviation Administration. They've become fans of it. And so 15 each from 2 groups, and it's 10 1-hour sessions, but it really gets in deep on it, and it's fun. So I'll send you more info on that. And and you know what, here's a last little thing. Let's just do, see if I can share one last little second here for you. Share screen, see if we can make this happen again. Hang on, where the heck is this thing? I'm going to show you what I'm about to do in just a few minutos. This is a sample of what the course is like, which is
like a sneak peek for
sneak peek. This is the ABT build exercise. Let's see, am I sharing that and that? And am I sharing right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And if you open the content, yeah.
Are you able to see that?
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Okay, so this is a guy I'm about to work with on 2 climate ABTs that he's got. And this is the way the exercise goes. I'll have him on screen, and then we'll just read the whole thing. There's the and material. We color code in blue. There's the but in red. There's the therefore. And then I'll start asking him these questions. What's the main character thing? Oh, it looks like it's about the future. What's your problem in 5 words or less? Which narrative, future or clean? But wait a second, looks like you've got 2 narratives going on here. This is about whatever it is, Power River Basin has no economic future, or is it about it needs to have a clean economic future? And then we go back to the thing, and then I offer up my suggestion. Here's how I would rewrite this thing. I'd say clean energy is the centerpiece, blah, 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 blah. But the Power River Basin is stuck with coal as the economy. Therefore, and then we got the second one going to. That is a really super condensed version of what I do in, you know, that will be 10 minutes worth of discussion that I will do with this guy. And
yeah, it takes time. Like in the workshop, we also like see, whereas like just normal writing an article, scientific article is difficult. And also this is a separate layer, you know, besides the scientific correctness and everything, you have to give it in a good, you know, good way, good format. It needs to, it just needs time. It takes time. You have to accept it.
A ton of time. That's again, the narrative gym. You've got to be doing this over and over again, putting in the time. Exactly. And what we do in the course then is what I just showed you there. I ran through it in 30 seconds, what I will expand out to 10 minutes with that guy. And then in the course, everybody gets their little 5 to 10 minute segment like that with me doing that. But then in addition to that, outside of the course, we do what's called working circles. And what a working circle is then is they'll take their ABT there, and it'll be a half-hour session where they're the host, and then 4 other people in the course who have got down the basics will be their circle. And the 5 people will meet, and the one guy will present his ABT, and then the other 4 will do what I do, which is start asking these questions. What about this? What about that? This here, one of you there. They've all got the basic rules of how to structure this, and that's working with the person in this. You have to make this stuff social. You cannot sit by yourself at a desk and write good narrative. You've got to have other people reading it and poking and prodding it, because you have all these blind spots. You just don't realize, you know, I thought this was good. And that's what you get as the person reads their ABT and the whole group is confused. And then you slowly work on it and shaping it. So that's one of the fundamental parts of the training, is to understand that narrative has got to be a social exercise. You can't do it by yourself at your desk. So that's my. So
I send a podcast link to the chat. I send the links of the 2 books. If they want to reach you, they know where to find you, where to find your books. And the course we talked about, I was going to ask it anyway. So like how is the course and how is the structure? So thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. It was such a wonderful interview.
Thank you for being a good host. You did a really good job here, and that was great. You brought up lots of good questions and digging up all those resources. So when it's just fun to do this stuff and to talk it through and think it through, because that's helps to clarify it in your mind. You know, a lot of times explaining to people for me is really valuable. So yay.
One thing that I will finish with is good. You know, after watching Randy's video, this and but therefore, I sent him an email with the same format, you know, and it worked. Like, you know, I said, like, we are a science communication platform. We did this and then, but we don't know about this method. Therefore, we want you to come. And then he just said, say when, you know, like it was such a wonderful moment. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. It works, guys. It works.
it really is good for emails. It really is. Yeah. That's
short
emails. And the last thing I'll say about that is one of my buddies here is one of the world's top experts on medical marijuana. And he's absorbed it listening to me for the last 10 years. And he told me recently, when he gives a big talk now and he's in the middle of answering a question, he gets lost. All he has to say is the one word, but. As soon as you say but, everybody looks up from their iPhones or whatever. And you can't end on the word but. You know, as soon as you said but, everybody's like, yeah, but
suspend,
what?
Right?
That's it. The word but. And a lot of us are coming to the realization there's probably no more powerful word in the English language than the word but. But is the word that lights the brain up, and it turns the narrative right there. And you've established this contradiction, and you can't finish on the word but unless you want to, which is maybe that's what I'll finish on. My last word.
So we had this kinds of good content and this kinds of over the years, but we will have more. So stay tuned. Okay.
Exactly. And on that note, I will leave you with my final message, which is, but
it's so nice. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for watching. And for the chat, I'm looking at, there were no other big questions. Thank you for watching us. And there will be Turkish subtitles in a month or so you can watch it in Turkish also. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and on Twitch. That's free. And therefore in this way you can get notified about the new videos and new content. You can go to gelecekbilimde.net to read our stuff, or you can follow us on social media platforms to see our content there. You can listen to this interview as a podcast in Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, also on Spotify Podcast. You can listen to the podcast. And with this, without further ado, I will also say but and go. So take care, stay with science and humans. Bye-bye.